Hey, all, thanks for watching. I just wanted to quickly inform you about my financial services agency, which operates in the life insurance space. So we help families with debt elimination plans and create tax-favored retirement solutions. We support small businesses, nonprofits, worker-owned co-ops, unions, and social enterprises with employee and member benefits. We offer white glove insurtech services to community banks, credit unions, financial co-ops, and CDFIs. And we provide enduring acceleration and downside capture strategies for all kinds of investors. Check out the link in the video description and enjoy the show. Well, thanks so much for being on the Mindful Marketplace here with me today. Lynier Richardson, I have on. He is a really impressive guy, and I am really excited to get to dig in with him on his perspective as part of the series that we're doing for Neighborhood Economics here on Biz Radio US. So, man, Lynier, welcome.
It's my pleasure. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, I am too, because you strike me as very interesting because, not only are you teaching at Rutgers and the executive director there of the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development. So you also went to law school. You've got a lot of academic cred. You also kind of have a lot of kind of nonprofit economic development cred as well in your CV here. But then also you've been a business owner and an entrepreneur as well. Is that right?
I have. I'm at a high point in my career right now because I get to teach entrepreneurship and advocate for entrepreneurs. Sometimes I like to call it, being a lamp. I get to shine the light on entrepreneurs, stand in the corner, and, try to illuminate good things that are happening. And then, for another part of my week, I get to be entrepreneurial and actually go and do projects, to structure deals, to invest in companies and enterprises, and all with the aim of, doing capitalism a little differently and making neighborhoods better. And specifically, my work has been focused on communities of color and closing the racial wealth gap, getting resources, and creating opportunities, for people that have been overlooked and undervalued.
Yeah, undervalued, I think, is a really common theme in what it seems like you, because that's important to know and to be able to identify in business and in, I think, the work that you're doing in community development. How do you see those things interplaying when it comes to undervalued assets or undervalued communities?
Yeah, when I teach a class at Rutgers Business School called Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development. And the central thesis of the class is to help people to see opportunity and to create business strategy and to determine how to arrange the capital, financial capital, community capital, social capital, and other types of capital to be able to operate profitably and sustainably, enterprises and projects in communities. And so that's the nature of my focus. Is like, how do I, we want to address this. Michael Porter has this article in a YouTube video that I really like. I share it often. And it's really focused on how to create business solutions to social problems. Mm-hmm. And that the core of the message is that when a solution is scalable and can be done profitably, it can be scaled. And, and if it can be scaled, it can be, much more impactful, right? So instead of just a nonprofit lens, even if there's a social mission, my focus has been how do you structure the transaction so that it can be profitable, so that it can be sustainable, and that it ultimately can be a solution that is scalable.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit. We've had on a lot. One of the focuses of our show has been, we kind of hit the solidarity economy in general, and one of those pieces is social enterprise, and that's kind of why I wanted to like dig in with you on that dichotomy of, kind of nonprofit work and business work and the blurry lines there and where they don't need to be lines and all of that kind of stuff. Because I started as I did the Peace Corps, and then I was a social worker for chronically homeless folks in the Detroit area, ran a food bank, did some other food insecurity work around there. But then I got a position as a social enterprise manager for a urban farming healthy food access nonprofit, where we were selling garden products and services so that we could then use the profits from those sales to fund the work we were doing, where we were giving low-income families raised beds, and we were holding classes to teach people how to grow their own food and kind of take control of their own food security. But for a lot of people, I feel like that's, those are two kind of separate worlds. There's an idea that we should only make as much as possible in our business, and that really that one bottom line sort of has to be the only bottom line. And then, if we're successful, maybe we'll give 10% of that back to a charity or something along those lines. But it seems like a lot of your work is on kind of questioning that assumption that those have to be two different pockets.
Yeah, Joe, I'm going to lament with you and say, man, I feel sorry for you. Here's why. You got the same bug that I have, right?
Yeah.
Some mornings I wake up and I wish that, the Lord had made my mission clear. Some people want to be very clear, want to be a billionaire. They want to own the world. They want to, invest in companies. They want to, make $1 billion. And there's some people that want to be missionaries. They want to save the world and work in nonprofits. I met recently had an opportunity to meet sisters, nuns who've, are really at their heart about, they've dedicated their lives to other people. Well, you and I and others and folks in neighborhood economics, we're in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Where I never wanted to be a billionaire, but I never wanted to take the vow of poverty either, right? And so the question would be, for me as always, could I do good? Could I have impact? Could I solve problems in the toughest places? Could I get resources to people who say, well, it's too hard, right? And at the same time, could I be profitable, right? For me, I've been an entrepreneur long enough that I can tell you without equivocation that operating a business and not making a profit at some point is not fun. Right? Even if you do it with passion, with great passion, with great passion, with people cheering for you, that, when you're struggling to meet payroll or, have cash management, cash flow problem, that's when business is not fun, right? So on the other hand, when you get an affirmation for someone that said, I've never had an opportunity until the work that you're doing or the project that you created, gave me a new approach, right? Gave me a new opportunity, gave me the capital I needed. That has its reward to me that is worth as much as, as much as cash, right? So that dilemma of how do you have impact? And I'm sure it's personal for each person, right? So I'm not extolling myself, or there are people who make money and do give 10% away, right? I have a friend that calls that throwing coats at the problem. Right? I'm going to make money and then I'm going to donate. And there's no, I don't denigrate or judge anybody for that.
Oh,
right?
no.
On the other hand, and again, I say I lament about it because it's much harder. It's much harder to run a social enterprise. It's much harder to raise capital when you're trying to have impact. And people are like, impact, that's great, but can you get me a 15% IRR, right? Mm-hmm. And so, there's a certain group of impact first investors as opposed to finance investors. But for every impact first investor, there's probably, 100 finance first investors, right? So the work is hard in a different way. Mm-hmm. but it's rewarding in a different way too. That feeds my soul.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Michael Schumann, who I got to have on, said. There's financial capital, but then there's also social capital.
Yes.
And I think that that's really where it's at. Is it just that our ideas of what a return on investment is, or what improvement, or what kind of these ideas that we have about productivity? Is it just that those ideas are too narrow?
Yeah, I certainly believe so. We have we're raising a little investment fund. We launched it, and our investors are what I call philanthropically motivated impact investors. Mm-hmm. Here's what that means. They're investing between $2 and $5 million in our fund. We have a concessionary return, a 5% preferred return, and an 8% target return. If you're raising capital in the traditional, non-impact space, those returns are considered low. But the case that I often make is, yes, you get a 5% return, but here are the basket of benefits, the other returns. Crime is lower. More people graduate from school. There's more, community engagement and civic involvement, right? That, there's inspiration. Hopefully there's some impacts on social determinants of health. People live longer, are healthier, right? And how do you calculate that? So you get a 5% return, financial return, but if one less person goes to prison, one less person is, finds a way to be economically productive, or, one less murder happens, right? One kid sees professionals that look like them working on a project or owning a project, or architects or lawyers, and gets inspired. That's got to be worth a 5% additional return or 12% return, right? Mm-hmm. And so that thought of finding someone that says, I made my money, traditional way in American capitalism system, either entrepreneurship, I succeeded in corporate, or I inherited a lot of dollars, right? My approach is, your $2 million investment in my enterprise, there's no reason why you must demand a 20% IRR if I can get you your money back and get you a return on capital and solve the problems that make your neighborhoods better, that improve the quality of life in the city and the places that you call home. There should be a compelling investment proposition. And so that's what's different, right? Because I still see even young professionals who come out of traditional banking, and they'll come into social enterprise, they'll come into a CDFI, they'll come into some big philanthropy, and they still will have been so ingrained, and as I said, we're trying to do capitalism a little differently, they're so ingrained with, we can do this work in the toughest part of the neighborhood, and there's some people who have and can get a market return, right? I believe to drive inclusive economic development, to strengthen the toughest parts of the city, you got to find favorable capital, right? And so that favorable investment capital. And so every day we're thinking about, how do you make the case, right? That's what the Neighborhood Economics Conference is, sort of giving us an opportunity to do, is to really talk about capital in a way that doesn't disrespect it, that values it, that places a priority on return of capital and even return on investment, but also level sets that expectation, so that the social impacts also are deemed merit worthy and a part of the definition of success.
Yeah, it's like you have to, and that's why I like that language of, the kind of the triple bottom line. And I think there can be more than three bottom lines, honestly, but, thinking that it's not, there are other bottom lines that we have to think about aside just from what's the maximum return on investment that I could get. and think, well, if I got the maximum return on investment, but in the process, I kind of cut my legs out for me in the future by destroying the environment that we live in, or by, hurting the community that I live in, which then creates more risk for me in the long run. Some of it seems like it needs to, like, our thinking around investment needs to broaden, but some of it seems like it just needs to extend further into the future. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I cannot imagine intentionally engaging in a business practice that is extractive. I wonder what that feels like on the other side. I wonder what the thought process is when someone will say, hey, you need the capital, I know you need it, so either take it at some usurious type of interest rate, or I look at payday lending and check cashing and weekly furniture rental, and I still often ask myself, well, clearly there's a market, right? People need it, and they must be serving the market. So I can imagine being in those boardrooms, or in the business strategy meetings, and saying, all right, we're going to offer these TVs that cost $500, and we're going to rent them out at $50 a week. And I'm assuming the business proposition would say we're making TV access affordable for people who wouldn't, right? But man, the $50 a week TV that is costs $500 and that's rented for a year, the person the company has it's a phenomenal probably financial return. But it really is continuing to perpetuate the financial insecurity and the poverty level of the individuals who must do that. So it's hard to, again, it's strategy, right? Someone says, here's what I'm doing, here's the problem. People don't have the ability to make a big credit purchase, and we're going to provide an option. But I often wonder, at what point does it become business strategy versus positive impact, right? And so that, again, so I don't knock it. I just know what's fun for me is to have business purpose, and social impact sure is really rewarding to me.
Well, that was a big thing that I remember. I've been kind of learning, and I've read a lot of books this year, and one of them was Marjorie Kelly's Wealth Supremacy. I just got to interview her yesterday, actually.
Oh, wow.
It was really great.
Yes.
And she talked about that idea in the book of there are ways to make money that are kind of productive, and then there are ways to make money that are extractive. She talked a lot about the extractive ways and what she calls like the financialization of our economy, especially in this kind of neoliberal era that we live in.
Yes.
And it sounds to me like that's a part of what you're saying. Maybe I'm off, but a part of it is that, okay, there are two ways to generate capital. There are two ways to make a profit. In broad strokes, you can either make a profit by creating something, by producing something, a good or a service, and then getting paid for the value that you add by adding that good or that service. Or you can figure out ways to kind of slice money out of the pie for yourself without really putting anything into it, which is known as like rent seeking, or like what you said with like if you just have a TV and you start renting out that TV, and it is striking to me because more and more it does seem like we're moving away from when you buy a movie now, you don't actually buy that movie, you kind of pay for the right to license it. Everything's on a subscription now. We don't actually own anything. Even work has become with the gig economy has become more and more where things, it kind of seems like we're having to turn our cars and our homes with Airbnb or anything into a profit making. It's like the profit making animal that needs to kind of keep eating. Sometimes feels like it's creeping more and more and more into your home and into your life and into your space. I don't know if I got a question wrapped up in there, but that's what you're making me think of.
No, and I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. With this little nuance, I mentioned I teach this class at Rutgers Business School, and a question that has been on my quiz every year for 10 years is: there's the bottom line the double bottom line, and triple bottom line. Give me a bullet point on what each means. And according to Professor Richardson, this is my way of making sure they listen in class, which is the most important. And the most important, I still believe, is the bottom line, the profit, the first line. You got to be profitable to stay sustainable, to stay in the game, to be able to have impact, right? And so I'm just thinking, in my work, it's, well, can we do capitalism just a little differently? We still got to be profitable,
right?
But is there an insistence on being a profit maximization, right? Or is there a way to invite people who typically have not had an opportunity to also invest on the same terms that we do and benefit financially from the success of the project or the business proposition that we're operating. So we now own, as you may know, we own 5 shopping centers. We're under contract to acquire our 6th. And the nature of the work is we identify a property, we do the due diligence, we do the financial underwriting, we ultimately decide, hey, to buy this property, we own shopping centers, little community shopping centers. To buy this community shopping center is going to require $1 million of equity. Mm-hmm. And we have decided that, we're willing to invest with our fund and with our own capital up to 95% of that equity. But we're also willing to accept as low as 49% of that, as low as 51% of that equity. So to make 49% available to community investors, to small individuals. And so we now have a few projects. We have 330 plus small, Black, local investors in our projects, right? And we're really excited about that because, what that means is these individuals, we expect, will patronize, will protect, will respect the shopping center, will have the pride of ownership, even if it's $1,000, that we own that, or we have an ownership stake, and we've never had an opportunity to have an investment, or to own something. I had a lady tell me once, I've lived in this community for 43 years. I call it my own, but I've never actually owned anything until I invested in the shopping center project, right? Mm-hmm. So that work of, democratizing ownership and sharing of profit. They're taking a risk. It's still a real estate project. If it doesn't work, they could lose their $1,000, all or a part of their $1,000. But we're, and we can lose all or a part of the $800,000 we've invested, right? But the goal is more people understanding business, understanding how an asset that they drive by and they, shop at in their neighborhood, how these individuals now can be connected to their ownership, can be empowered to make decisions, can, have voice in the process, right? And hopefully that will stimulate other investment activity, as I said, civic engagement, inspiration to the youth. So even the 330 people, we don't brand as we brand it as we own this. And the we is not just those 330 people. It's, I went to college with them. That's my uncle or my grandson or my, cousin, my prom date. We have a connection to somebody that owns something in our communities. And that's the innovation. It's still very rare. We're early in the process. Obviously, very hopeful that things will turn out as we expect and working very hard to make that reality. But that thesis of allowing more individuals to benefit, to participate and to benefit from capitalism is what I mean by doing capitalism a little differently.
Yeah, you've mentioned a couple times kind of doing it differently. And what I think is neat about that is that, we have this idea when we think about entrepreneurship, especially the startup world and all of that, one of the biggest values that gets extolled is innovation, figuring out a better way to do things, always kind of having that mentality. We can always make it better. We can always do it better. But when you mention, kind of doing that to capitalism, or to, whatever the economic system is, that suddenly becomes a little bit different of a conversation, because now it feels like it's not really talked about as innovation. It's talked about as like, some radical revolutionary thing. But it sounds like what you're saying is there's ways that we could actually evolve what we have now rather than having to overthrow what we have now.
Again, that's optimism, right? That's what I hope. There's no future in pessimism, right? So the optimist in me really believes that we should look at the system that has served us well, right? I live in America. I'm a proud American. I'm proud to participate in capitalism. I've benefited from, my dad being an entrepreneur and sending us to college and, buying a house using the GI Bill. So there's so many things that are good about our country. I believe that. I think there's opportunity for us to continue, as you said, to innovate, to look at things critically, to figure out how we address the systemic inequality and both racial wealth gap and just, income inequality, the difference between the CEO making, half a $1 billion a year and the average employee making $15, $50 an hour, and the lowest income employee making $15 an hour. There's something about that still makes me want to try to convince the $500 million person that, hey, how about $200 million and figure out strategies, not a gift, it's not merit-based. Clearly, you earned it. But how I believe our economy would be better if, more people had, more income to be able to try. Here, I'll say it this way, and I joke about this all the time. I've made money and I've lost money, right? Mm-hmm. In periods where I've made money, I've always had this thought of like, you get on the airplane, there's first class, right? People sit in first class. And then people walk by to coach. Well, my dream and my definition of fun is getting on a plane with all of my investors and getting on a plane with people who've been supportive of my work. And we all are in first class, right? There's no coach.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And again, some of that can sound, anti-capitalism in a way. I get it. But at least every now and then, there should be a period where we all, enjoy the full benefits of the capitalism system of America.
Well, and as someone who's sort of gone that same sort of route, so after I left nonprofits, I did get into business. It took me a few years, but I started to find success, and I wasn't the highest roller in the world, but I was making way more money than I ever thought I would, and I was doing it on not too much time. Like I kind of had some time freedom too.
Yes.
And once I got to that point, I realized like, oh, this is actually, now that I'm out of that panic mode, I'm out of that like just crushing kind of weight of being broke all the time mode.
Yes.
Having to think about, because the less money you have, the more you have to think about it.
Absolutely.
And so because of that, and I had the resources to, I started doing things like, I got a massage, and I got some acupuncture, and I went to therapy, and I actually started to be able to work on myself and grow as a person, because I wasn't in that constant survival mode. And what I realized was so much of what I wanted was to be able to offer that to other people, so that of course it's not that everyone should be given more. People add more, contribute more, and should be compensated more for that, absolutely. But I would love a business world, and I think it sounds like you would too, where you don't have to you don't have to work 2-3 jobs, hustle just to still be in that survival mode. And I think that I don't feel like it should be too political to say that.
Correct, to say that. That's exactly right. That again, that's the innovation, that more people will think about it in a different way and be willing to even have that conversation in a way that doesn't seem like we can make the pie bigger. Mm-hmm. That the fact that I make a little more, my team makes a little more money, And you can do all of the risk reward, merit. I worked hard, but it does seem that there's a part of capitalism that needs to be that needs to think inclusively. It needs. That's
like
right.
another
That's
book that I remember reading when I was coming up in business was Mindset by Carol Dweck. Are you familiar with that?
Absolutely. Yes, great book.
So I'm wondering what you would, if you're thinking about having a growth mindset around our economics, what would that mean for you?
So for me, it's improving access to capital to, individuals who've been denied for whatever reason. And again, without apologizing, recognizing systemic issues, racial issues that have been a part of, the American, history, right? So, creating both capital and support systems that allow more people to be entrepreneurial. That's my work at Rutgers. It's like, hey, it's not just about the social programs. If we can figure out how to help more people think about business strategies, we can help more people get a business off the ground, if we can help more people get capital and get contract opportunities so that those businesses are sustainable, if we can help, there's all these statistics around that if you just help, black-owned businesses become employer firm, to add 1 or 2 more employees to their, to their payroll, that'll have a I think it was a $5 trillion impact on our economy. I think I read in a report by by one of the big financial houses. So that to me is where smart people, people with capital, people with that now have this philanthropically motivated approach. The McKinsey Scotts of the world who are providing capital to projects. It's like there's a lane where providing capital to help other people generate wealth and keep wealth and get financial literacy and implement, buy their first home. I mean, all of those things are, creating more wealth and creating more economic opportunity. And again, I think they will pay long-term dividends to our country and ultimately the world over time.
Yeah. You mentioned black-owned businesses, and obviously that was one thing that I loved about neighborhood economics is the focus on, yes, we can make an ROI and we can invest locally, but we could also even do it on top of that into communities that have been redlined, that have been either overtaxed, that have been not allowed access to resources, whatever their ethnic background is. But I wanted to get your perspective a little bit because we've had on Bruce Waller a couple times, who's the director of Black Wall Street Asheville, that's here locally. They do a ton of awesome programs for black entrepreneurs and for other entrepreneurs of color. They've got some funding to give some classes, to get some resources and all that kind of stuff. I am curious on the history of Black Wall Street a little bit, because I know that this was something that there were lots of movements around the country in kind of the Reconstruction time. Am I right on that? I'm curious if you could shed a little light on what happened to those movements and why they didn't, why it's had to be resurrected.
Yeah, so there's a violence in American history that some of those centers of commerce that were built and prospered because of just raw grit and ingenuity and cooperative economics in black communities. They became these little sort of hubs and clusters of business activities that ultimately people start to refer to as Black Wall Street. Insurance company, there's a bank, there's a butcher, there's a lawyer, there's the doctor's office, all concentrated. Well, there's some great documentaries and a whole lot of articles and books even about the violence that happened, right? And that those communities were destroyed either in racial issues. Some of them were destroyed. I worked on a project in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where a mecca of black business called Rondo was a number of black-owned businesses. I can't remember the exact number, 200 or 300 black-owned businesses were um, removed because there was a new highway system put in, right? So it was, again, the system, right? So that has happened a number of times. And so the reconstruction effort is now about, A, recognizing that history, celebrating in some respects the entrepreneurial ingenuity and the grit that was required to get these, mecca, little clusters of economic activity and community pride, to make them viable and to successful. And now really to learn like how that happened, what new resources are available to reconstruct them. And the world has changed in some respect. Some of those places were walkable, now, people drive and shop it more regionally. But the question now is, well, all right, how do we identify, black-owned businesses that are important to community, are anchors, are places that gather, that have history, that employ people, that support the Little League baseball team, that have innovative projects and are employing, a lot of folks. How do you help them continue to grow? How do we position them for opportunities both? And then how do we also stimulate businesses that are really focused on next economy? Like what's a growth sector, right? A lot of the work, I think about at Rutgers is how do we intentionally help more entrepreneurs of color, black entrepreneurs, think about growth sectors and start businesses in areas where, what I call next economy, where there is growth potential and where there is a more easier path to accessing capital, right? So it's funny, it's easier now to access capital for, an industry in the green economy. It's easier to access capital for, some tech or tech-enabled, it's easier to raise capital for even, I was a blockchain than it is to raise capital for opening a new restaurant that has my grandmother's, pound cake recipe, right? And so, not that there's a denigration, right? There's a place for both, but my work is, all right, we're going to help the ice cream store and the cupcake maker and the one-man consultancy, stay in business, but we also
are
going
to
dessert,
shine. By the way.
Yeah, it got me hungry, right. But we're also going to help the entrepreneur really identify a growth sector, right? I joke sometimes, cannabis is a growth industry. Well, let's put some cannabis in those cupcakes, right? Right? Just somehow to think about how do we continue, to stimulate and to start businesses in the growth sector of our economy.
Yeah. Because when those businesses are grown from within the community, I was talking to Jeremiah Robinson about this with Mountain BizWorks, the CDFI that's down here, and he was talking about the difference between when a business comes from out of town, when a dollar store or a retail chain store comes into a community versus when that business actually arises from within the community, and just how big of a difference that could make. I realized I didn't ask you, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Chicago. I started my early life at west side of Chicago, and my parents owned a bar. I grew up in a community they refer to as K-Town, or some people have called it West Garfield, but it's by the Bull Stadium on the west side of the city. And then we moved to western suburbs. Yeah, just outside the Loop. When we were about 9 or 10, we moved to a little small, inner ring suburb, that was experiencing racial change, and in 10 years it went from 10% black to 50% black. Another 10 years is 70-80% black. So it's been but that's my origin. I still have family in Chicago and in those neighborhoods.
I love Chicago. It reminds me of, I think it's Anthony Bourdain referred to Chicago. He said it's big-hearted and cold-blooded. Do you feel like that kind of shaped your kind of attitude towards how you approach things?
Yeah, big-hearted and cold. I've never heard that said, but I like that thought of that. That's a very cool thing. Again, my approach has been, I just remember, even though I remember my grandmother saying, my grandmother lived in a very modest house on the west side of Chicago. And what I always remember her saying is, even though we don't have a lot of money, we still can take pride in what we own, right? We mowed the grass, picked up trash, and not only on our property, but on the block. And not only in front of our house, but in front of the neighbor's house, right? So that work is something that, has been helpful to us.
Yeah. I know that you have gotten to go to the previous neighborhood economics conferences, and I know that you've been involved with the organization here for a while, and your group, the
Chicago
Executive
Trend, yes.
Center for Urban Entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
and, that you guys have been a partner of neighborhood economics. I guess what did you get out of the last conferences that you've been to? Like what did you really walk away with from?
Yeah. So, I have great respect for the organizers of the Neighborhood Economic Development the conference. Kevin Jones, his wife, the
Rosalie.
leadership team they put together. It's a really cool, sort of, group of people that have inspiration to be able to move, to bring this idea together. What was fun, so I went to the first two conferences. What has been fun about the conferences is a focus on identifying projects that are ready for capital, and then helping to illuminate those entrepreneurs, those investment funds that are ready for capital. So there's a portion of the work that's saying, how do we get capital to scale ideas and to scale entrepreneurs so that they can have greater impact? There were 4 or 5 individuals that were at the first conference, and we all said, hey, we formed a vehicle, we have a track record, but we still are all struggling to raise the first 10 or 20 or $50 million of capital. Neighborhood economics has, put a, has really put an emphasis on how to help, this cohort of entrepreneurs raise capital. Tranche 1. There's a tranche 2 that is very specific, related to, grassroots economic development, what the individual can do, what the church can do, what the local, millionaire, how can they participate in strengthening, parts of the city that need investment, and entrepreneurs that can. So to do that and to talk about black entrepreneurship without apology, to do that and think about new structures and to try things or propose that, pilot projects, that is the core of neighborhood economics. And I'm hoping that it continues to grow. First year, I think it was, maybe it was 200 people. Second year, maybe it was 400 people. And these were entrepreneurs and philanthropic organizations and church leaders and political leaders and, other community development organizations, CDFIs and CDCs. So I'm hoping that it continues to build momentum, not just as a conference, but that over time you'll see those entrepreneurs who are ready for capital got capital. Mm-hmm. Those individuals who wanted to invest on a micro level, $100 or $1,000 into these microeconomic development funds, had an opportunity to do it. That the little enterprises got formed, that the entrepreneurs got capital and training and education. I'm hoping that over the next 5 years or the decade, that there'll be a lot of proof points that leaning into this and being intentional about neighborhood economic development and inclusive economic growth can be done in a way that makes our economy better and our country stronger.
Yeah. I guess to go out here, what when you're talking to your students about this stuff, like what kind of message are you giving to them, the ones that kind of get what you're about and want to follow in sort of innovating and doing things differently?
It's so funny. I tell people all the time that when I graduated from law school, I passed the bar exam, and it was such a tough exam that I remember sort of getting on my knees and, Lord, if you let me pass this exam, I'll never go in any classroom ever again. right? And so when I came back to be a professor, I had to make sure I had to get right with my covenant. I'm like, well, I'm not praying for the exam, I'm sharing knowledge, right? And so it's a different part of the table, and I got right with the Lord on that. And so when I'm teaching my students, what I'm sharing is, if you see problems in the world, as business people, I teach in the business school. Rutgers has a very highly regarded, the Blaustein School of Public Policy, right? I teach in the business school. So if you have a business mind and business acumen, you have access to resources and relationships, you can use all of that in a way that can make strategy and business ideas and implement programs and attract investment that can address the problems that are most perplexing, or the problems that seem like government should be doing it or someone else, that we can do it. And in fact, when we do it, it's so incredibly rewarding, financially rewarding, but also, fulfilling in a way that is deep and very, very meaningful.
Yeah, I love that. I can't think of a better way to close us out here. So thank you so much, Lynier Richardson. We'll put links to his work in the show notes here. And for all of you out there, check out Neighborhood Economics, check out Lynier's work, and obviously subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts. And until next time, remember, we are each other.